Imagine trying to read a passionate, urgent letter written in a foreign language that you only partially understand. You might grasp a few basic words, but you will inevitably miss the cultural nuances, the hidden metaphors, and the raw emotional weight of the message. This is precisely what happens when modern readers approach the ancient teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. We read his words through a comfortable Western lens, missing the scandalous reality of what he was saying to his original audience. For over 2 millennia, many of his most famous sayings have been sanitized, domesticated, and stripped of their original political and cultural sting. We have turned revolutionary, world-altering statements into harmless bumper stickers. Today we are going to peel back the layers of history, language, and ancient Jewish sociology to reconstruct the truth. We will explore 10 famous teachings of Jesus that modern culture has misunderstood, revealing the brilliant reality hiding underneath. The first teaching is perhaps the most famous example of pacifism. Jesus told his followers that if someone strikes them on the right cheek, they should turn the other also. For centuries, people have interpreted this as a command to be a passive victim and simply accept violent abuse. But in the ancient Middle East, this was actually a masterclass in non-violent resistance. To strike someone on the right cheek required using the back of the right hand. A backhanded slap was a specific, calculated insult meant to humiliate an inferior, like a slave or a peasant. By turning the other cheek, the victim is forcing the attacker to use the open palm. An open palm slap was reserved exclusively for social equals. Jesus was not telling the oppressed to submit to further abuse. He was teaching them to stand up, look their oppressor directly in the eye, and demand to be treated as an equal human being, effectively stripping the abuser of their power. The second misunderstood teaching involves a camel and the eye of a needle. Jesus said it is easier for a massive animal to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. A popular rumor claims there was a small gate in Jerusalem called the Eye of the Needle, and a camel had to strip off its baggage to squeeze through. This is a medieval myth because there was never a gate with that name in the ancient walls of Jerusalem. Jesus was using Jewish hyperbole, a common rabbinic teaching method that relied on absurd comical exaggeration to make a point. He was painting a ridiculous mental image of the largest animal in Israel trying to squeeze through the smallest opening in a domestic household. He meant what he said. For a person consumed by wealth and materialism, it is not just difficult to enter the kingdom, it is a biological impossibility without a staggering intervention of divine grace. The third misunderstanding surrounds the famous phrase, "take up your cross." Today, people use this phrase to describe a minor inconvenience. A bad boss, a chronic illness, or a difficult neighbor is often called a cross to bear. But to a Jewish peasant living under the brutal, suffocating occupation of the Roman Empire, the cross was not a metaphor for a bad day. It was the most terrifying instrument of state-sponsored torture and execution ever engineered by a military force. When Jesus told his disciples to take up their crosses, he was using language that would have made their blood run cold. He was inviting them to an actual death march. He meant that following his path required a total surrender of their lives, being willing to march toward execution, and suffer the ultimate rejection by the surrounding culture. It was a radical call to treason against the corrupt systems of the world, offering their lives for the sake of the new kingdom. Our fourth teaching is heavily quoted in modern secular culture. "Judge not, that you be not judged." People use this verse to claim that Christians should never evaluate anyone else or call out destructive behavior. But if you read the rest of the paragraph, Jesus is not forbidding discernment. He immediately talks about removing a heavy wooden plank from your own eye before you try to remove a tiny speck of sawdust from the eye of your neighbor. The teaching is a devastating critique of hypocrisy, not a ban on moral judgment. Jesus is warning his followers that the standard they use to condemn others will be the severe standard applied to them. He demands intense, painful self-reflection first. You cannot help a brother with his flaws if you are blinded by your own unacknowledged arrogance. Once your own vision is cleared by humility, Then you are commanded to help remove the speck from your brother. Number 5 brings us to the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus blesses the meek. In modern English, the word meek has become a synonym for weakness, timidity, and cowardice. But the original Greek word used in the ancient text is praus. This specific word was actually an equestrian and military term used to describe wild war horses that had been successfully trained for intense battle. A praus war horse was not weak or fragile. It possessed terrifying physical strength and destructive capability, but that immense power was brought under the strict control of its rider. Biblical meekness is not the absence of power, it is the deliberate, disciplined restraint of power. Jesus was promising the earth to those who have the capacity to cause devastating destruction, but choose to sheathe their swords and channel their strength into healing instead. Number 6 is a verse repeated in almost every small church meeting. Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there am I among them. Modern believers use this to validate small attendance, assuming it means God will show up even if only a couple of people attend a prayer service. But the context of Matthew chapter 18 is not about cozy worship gatherings at all. It is a detailed legal protocol for handling conflict and church discipline within the community. In ancient Jewish jurisprudence, based on the book of Deuteronomy, a single person could not convict someone of a crime or a serious moral failure. You needed 2 or 3 reliable witnesses to establish the truth of a matter. Jesus was telling his leaders that when they have to make agonizing decisions to confront toxic behavior in their community, they do not carry that heavy legal burden alone. If they follow the ancient protocol, his authority stands in the room with them. The 7th misunderstood teaching is the harsh response: let the dead bury their own dead. A young man wanted to follow Jesus, but asked to go bury his father first. It sounds incredibly cruel for a spiritual teacher to deny a grieving son the chance to attend a funeral. But cultural anthropologists point out a fascinating detail about Middle Eastern customs. If the father were actually dead in the house, the son would not be standing outside talking to a traveling rabbi. The father was likely still very much alive. The young man was essentially using a cultural excuse, asking to wait until his elderly father passed away in a few years so he could secure his financial inheritance before committing to the journey. Jesus saw right through the delay tactic. He was challenging the man to stop hiding behind the comfort of a future inheritance and step into the urgent, vibrant calling of the present moment. The mission of rescuing humanity could not wait. The 8th misunderstood teaching sounds like a battle cry for holy war. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For centuries, violent men have used this verse to justify shedding blood in the name of religion. But in the ancient Jewish literary tradition, the sword was a recognized metaphor for a sharp, painful division, not physical warfare on a battlefield. Jesus was issuing a stark warning about the sociological fallout of his message. The ancient world was built on fierce loyalty to your family clan and your ancestral traditions. Choosing to follow a radical crucified rabbi would instantly sever those ancient social ties. The sword represents the heartbreaking reality that families would be torn apart, parents would disown their children, and societal peace would shatter because of allegiance to the truth. He was acknowledging the brutal sociological cost of discipleship in an ancient culture. Number 9 revolves around the most famous short story ever told, the parable of the prodigal son. We assume this is just a heartwarming story about a rebellious young boy who makes terrible choices and comes back to a forgiving father. While that is true, the original audience would have been far more shocked by the actions of the older patriarch. In the ancient Near East, an elderly landowner running was a culturally shameful, undignified spectacle. A patriarch simply never hiked up his robes and sprinted through the dirt of a village. By doing so, the father was deliberately taking the public shame of his rebellious son upon himself before the angry townspeople could reject the boy with a traditional shaming ceremony. Furthermore, Jesus was delivering a stinging indictment of the religious elite through the older brother, exposing how their rigid, Joyless obedience had made them bitter enemies of grace. The 10th and final misunderstanding happens during the darkest moment in human history. As Jesus hangs suffocating on the Roman cross, he screams, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Many modern theologians claim this was a moment of shattered faith, or the exact second the Father turned his back in disgust. But to a first-century Jewish audience, this was something entirely different. He was directly quoting the opening line of Psalm 22. In an era before chapters and verses were numbered, rabbis would cite an entire passage by simply reciting its first line. Every Jewish person standing at the execution site knew Psalm 22 by heart. They knew it began with an agonizing cry of abandonment, describing a victim with pierced hands and feet surrounded by enemies. But they also knew that the psalm ends with a triumphant roar of victory, declaring that God ultimately rescues the sufferer. It was not a cry of defeat. It was a bold, breathless declaration of ultimate victory hidden inside a scream of agony. When we strip away our comfortable modern assumptions and read these teachings through their original ancient lens, a remarkably different portrait of Jesus emerges. He was not a soft, passive philosopher offering gentle advice for a peaceful life. He was a brilliant, subversive rabbi who dismantled corrupt systems and flipped social hierarchies. When we reconstruct the true historical context of these 10 teachings, we have to look in the mirror and ask ourselves a piercing psychological question. Why do we constantly try to domesticate the words of Jesus? We soften his radical statements because a harmless poetic teacher is easy to ignore, but a king who demands total allegiance, who shatters our prejudices, and who commands us to take up an instrument of execution is incredibly dangerous to our modern comfort. If this historical journey through the ancient language and culture changed the way you read the scriptures, please leave a like and subscribe to God is Greater. We are committed to stripping away the modern myths to reveal the raw, powerful truths of history. Tell me in the comments below, which of these 10 teachings surprised you the most? Do you want us to explore the historical context of the parables next? Your curiosity fuels the exhaustive research for this channel. We want to empower you with solid academic facts so you can read the ancient texts with fresh, informed eyes. Thank you for diving into the fascinating sociology of the first century with us today. Keep asking the difficult questions, keep pursuing the unfiltered truth, and as always, remember that history is far greater than you think. God is greater. See you in the next one.